So next we have Laura, who's going to come up and share about her experience with Fresh Start. So I'm going to thank Laura in advance for sharing, because I might be crying later and not be able to come back out. So this is Laura. Thank you very much.
I'm always scared when I have to stand up with a microphone. So my name is Laura Curry, and I am a former resident of Fresh Start. I am a recovered alcoholic. I've been sober for a little over 2.5 years now. And I always like to say that not only am I a recovered alcoholic, but today because of the power of God in my life, and because of places like Fresh Start. Today I also am a mother, physically and emotionally present in my 3 children's lives. I am a friend. I am a trusted and loyal employee. I am a daughter. I am a niece. I am all of the things that drugs and alcohol and eventually homelessness prevented me from being for a long time. I always cry when I talk, when I speak for Fresh Start. I've been really privileged to speak from the podium in recovery meetings, and that's kind of a different deal. I'm 51 years old, and when I came to Fresh Start, well, I'll go back a little bit. How much time do I have? 10, 15? Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I came from. So I was born and raised in Lincoln. I always like to say that there was no reason for me to become an alcoholic or a drug addict. I had a pretty basic home life. My parents were divorced when I was 4, and my mother was a single mother for 7 years. So I got to really see through experience and appreciate what it was like to raise children by yourself as a single woman. My mom remarried, and she was a medical secretary for a number of years. My dad was a teacher and then went on to be a college professor. Pretty middle class. I went to Lincoln East High in the early 80s, and I always like to say that that was right before Reagan came into office, and so it seemed as though drugs were legal. They were rampant at my high school, and it seemed like almost anybody and everybody where they were involved in some type of drug use on different levels. And so it was pretty easy to obtain drugs, use drugs. The legal consequences weren't looming at that time, but it was pretty much social. It was pretty much social. I was able to maintain a good grade point average, and I was able to be in show choir and DECA and other things like that. And so I didn't have a lot of consequences early on. I had my one DUI when I was 21. I think alcoholic or not, a lot of people tend to get that. And I remember going to the Independence Center for an evaluation for my probation. And I remember the woman telling me that their suggestion was that I enter an inpatient treatment program because I was a blackout drinker. And I remember looking at her and thinking that she was totally insane, and I had all these ideas how it was all for insurance, reasons, and they were trying to make money, because I could not see myself as a problem drinker at that point. I went on and managed restaurants. I worked at the university for a while. I met my ex-husband, and we got married when I was 30. I had my first child when I was 32, and then my second child when I was 36, and then meth entered the picture, methamphetamines. I think it's really important for me when I talk about my drug history to talk about what is the face of methamphetamine addiction. And I think what people think, much like the alcoholic and the person under the bridge with the bottle of the brown bag, people's idea about what a methamphetamine addict is that someone living in a trailer, cooking meth, they haven't washed for days, no shoes on their feet, and their skin's a mess. And I was a soccer mom when I started using methamphetamine. I had used cocaine in the past, socially, here and there, and it wasn't a problem for me. And so I believed that methamphetamine would be the same. And I really appreciate the poem. It spoke to me. I believe that if there's a devil on earth, it's probably methamphetamine. And when I started messing around with it, it took me hard and fast. Within about 2 years, I I quit a job that I loved and meant the world to me. I was working for a nonprofit agency here in town, helping people achieve economic self-sufficiency and their families. And after about 6 months of hard drug use, I could no longer continue doing that job because I was living a life that was horrendous. And I couldn't do it anymore. So I quit my job. I left my husband. My parents by that time knew that something was wrong. They thought that I was either mentally ill or I was being abused, domestic abuse. They called all these doctors, they called Mayo Clinic, and thank God my mother had a friend who sat on the board at St. Monica's, and she finally said, "Have you ever thought about drugs?" And my mother said, "Well, no." And she said, "I think you need to think about it." And so she did a little more investigation and then asked me. And by that point, I was ready to do something different. And I told her yes, that it was methamphetamines. And so they took my children and said, "We're going to take the kids and get them settled and get you a chance to get well." And so they took them, and I didn't get well. Instead, I decided to, my kids were gone, so I decided to go off the deep end, and eventually I started using drugs intravenously. And while doing so, I met my youngest son's father, and I always remember that the first time that I used IV drugs was in his apartment, and I remember asking him, of course, I didn't know how to do it myself, and I was trying to find someone to do it for me in the group of people. And I remember asking him, and he looked at me and he said, I don't even think you should do it. Why do you want to go live in a world where people go to prison?" And I remember those words today because once again I thought, why would he say such a thing? It's just a social thing. And I got pregnant, and I got into St. Monica's. And I ended up having a miscarriage, and I went back out and used. But then I got clean from meth in March of that year, and stayed clean off meth for 6 years. And as a result of doing so, I was able to get my kids back through the guardianship court. I had another child who is now 9 with my boyfriend, and I thought that things were okay. I continued to drink, of course, because alcohol is legal and socially acceptable. So I continued to drink, but it was controlled drinking, pretty much, and I didn't have a lot of consequences from it. And then my youngest son's father died of a heroin overdose. And that is when my disease decided to try to kill me. And I believe that the disease of alcoholism or addiction is progressive. And I believe that it is fatal. And it will take any opportunity that it has to get you drunk and get you high and kill you, because that is its purpose. And I was grieving, and I decided to drink to deal with the grief, and that didn't work out too well because I was too drunk. By noon I'd be passed out and couldn't do laundry, couldn't cook dinner, forgot to pick the kids up from school. So I wasn't doing very well, and so I got this really bright idea to start using methamphetamine again, because I would be able to do laundry and cook and pick up my kids, and I would have all this energy, and I wouldn't lay on the couch and cry anymore because Shane was dead. And I knowingly and purposely went out and sought that out. I think back to that, and I didn't know anybody that was using anymore, so I went to the very people who Shane had been using with before he died, and who felt a little bit responsible for his death and used that. I think the poem talked about lying and cheating and manipulation. And I said, you know what? I made this decision to use again, and I need you to help me with it. And if you don't help me, I'm going to find somebody else to help me. And so they did. And within about a year and a half, I was getting evicted. I had quit working at my mother-in-law's daycare. The electricity was shut off. Everybody knew that I was using, and I still wouldn't admit it. And my mother hired a moving company, moved all my things into storage, and took the kids that summer, and within about a month I was in the crisis center in methamphetamine psychosis and overdose. And so gratefully, when I was in the crisis center, my mother-in-law and my parents were able to get legal guardianship of my children because I was considered to be incarcerated, so they did. And I didn't even know, I was out about a week before I realized that they'd done that. So I wasn't quite sure what was happening. And I continued to use, I had this idea, my plan. I always have a plan. I think my plans are good. And I have a plan, and I say, if I only knew that I would have my children on Saturday, if I could see them on Saturday, then I won't use today. But I didn't get to see them on Saturday. And that promise never came because by that point my family stopped talking to me. And they stopped answering my phone calls, and my car had been repossessed, and I was living on people's couches and out of my storage facilities. And I went to treatment. I knew that I probably needed to get off the drugs again. So I went to St. Monica's again, and I stayed there for 9 days. And they wanted me to take some kind of mental health drugs. I can't remember what it was, some kind of mood stabilizer. And I refused to do that, and they said, well, we can't treat you anymore. So I left, packed up my things and left, and went on drinking and using. And I went to Touchstone, and they got me in there. And I walked into that treatment facility only being a drug addict. And that was really a good deal for me, because then when I got out of treatment successfully, 44 days later, I could drink vodka because it was really hot. It was July, and I was really thirsty, and I couldn't wait to get out. And I walked out of treatment, and someone picked me up, and I drank that night. I drank that night because I had no solution in my life for my hopelessness and futility. So I drank that night, and I went on to smoke meth eventually. And I'm sure I would have been sticking a needle in my arm within a few months, because that's generally how it goes. When I was at Touchstone, a friend of mine there had gone to Fresh Start and had an interview and came back and told me about what a great place it was. And I remember thinking, I will never have to live in a halfway house because I have a big plan. And my plan is I'm going to walk out of here free from drugs, and I'm going to get a great job because I'm super employable, right? I have all this experience, and I got fired from every job I ever had, probably. But I really thought I'd get a good job and get my children back and have a place to live within a few months, and that wasn't the case. So by the time I got the call from Fresh Start, I went and interviewed with them and put my name on the list, and all my things were gone. I was living in a couple hotels, and I was in a hotel with a friend, and he had decided he'd had enough of my ridiculousness and done my things in a parking lot, and I left them there and walked off, and I called my aunt and uncle because I was very sick, and I had nowhere to go. And amazingly, I was sober at that point. I hadn't used or drank for a while. I believe that without asking, that God removed that obsession from me, because I didn't have one of those minutes where I fell on my knees and begged God to help me and help me not drink or use. That didn't happen. But I woke up one day and I did not drink or use. And Fresh Start called my aunt's house after I'd been there about 2 days and said, we have a bed. And I was really scared. I felt like I'd been in jail and in treatment and locked up, and my uncle drove me to drop me off, and I remember panicking because I said, what if they don't let me get out to get cigarettes? And he said, well, and I said, what if I don't get out? And he stopped at Russ's and got a pack of cigarettes for me, and I walked through those front doors, and I had the clothes that I had on. And I borrowed some shampoo and some things like that from my mom's sister, and that's all I had. I had that, and I had desperation. I had that gift of desperation, and I was full of fear, and I was alone. I walked in, and I remember they were making dinner. And the women were sitting around the table. And it was this big, long table. And the woman who ended up being my roommate was one of the people cooking. And they had chili and some kind of bread. And she had this shredded white cheese for the chili. And I remember it melting in that bowl and sitting there with those women and thinking, this is the first time in forever that I sat at a table and had dinner with people, and knew that I could stay, that I wouldn't have to get up and leave after I was finished. And I got my things for my bedroom and went downstairs and made my bed, and slept in that bed, and knew that I didn't have to get up and leave. You know, I made some pretty poor choices in my life, and my behaviors were pretty deplorable sometimes. And I had been having sex with men for drugs and a place to stay, and I didn't have to do that anymore. I got up in the morning, and I remember going upstairs and making coffee. And that kitchen became my place, my safe place. It became my safe place, and I didn't have a cell phone, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't have my children, and I didn't have a friend in the world, and I hated the rules, and I was afraid of all of the women that worked there because I was sure that they didn't understand me, and that I wasn't going to be able to do what I needed to do. And I would get up in the morning, and I would get to go in the back room, and I would get to pick out clothes because I didn't have any. And it was like being a princess, I mean, I was pretty thin and pretty sick when I got there, and they had all of these nice things, and they had all of this nice shampoo and conditioner and all these several toothbrushes and a comforter for the bed and shoes and jewelry and all of these things, and I hadn't lived like that for a very long time, if ever. And then what I found out is that I always had someone to talk to. In the beginning, there were 23 other women there that were just about as insane as I was, and I couldn't stand to look at their faces because it was like looking in a mirror, and it was hearing my story. And everything that I struggled with and suffered from, they were struggling with and suffering from the same things. But I learned to be a good listener, a better listener. There was always someone to sit down with and have coffee, smoke a cigarette, and talk to about their life and their experiences. And I hadn't had any friends that were women ever in my life. And, I always said I wanted all men to want to screw me and all women to be jealous of me. And so I usually use the F word, but so that was pretty much it. And I found out that these women, they enriched my life. And most of all, the women that worked there, I found out that each and every one of them in their own way were a lot like me. And had experiences and had situations in their life that brought them there to work there and be of service to these women and help them have a better life because they understood. Because they understood. And I would get up in the morning, and I could always go in their office and talk to them. I work a really strong AA program, and I was able to not work and instead take the time to get a sponsor and take steps in that program so that I can have a relationship with God who solves my problems now, And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I would have been in a halfway house where I had to get a job, for minimum wage and get out there and try to work. I have the privilege of working with other women and seeing other women in meetings, fellowship meetings, and I always tell them that, Fresh Start offers a gift that no other place in Lincoln does, is that you can go there and you can work on getting well, you know? Because I don't know about some of you and some of you other residents, but I was batshit crazy when I got there. I couldn't read. I couldn't read. I spent countless hours doing crossword puzzles and Sudokus to try to get my brain back because I couldn't think, and I couldn't have held a job. I always appreciate the neighborhood in Havelock. They're really good at employing women in the area. I was able to get a job at Russ's, and it was probably the first job I think I might have ever had that I didn't get fired from or quit because I was going to get fired. I sacked groceries, and I was really, really good at it. I was really good at it, and I liked getting everything in the bag, but most of all, I liked saying, no, let me do that for you. And walking people out to their car and being of service to them and thinking about someone else besides myself. I think back when my year was up, I was scared to leave. I wanted to stay, and I thought I was sure when I got there that I wouldn't even have stayed 3 months, and I wanted to stay because I wasn't sure that I knew how to make it outside of those walls, and I gotten so much from the women that worked there, and I was frightened. And I walked out of those doors, and I got a little basement apartment. And I laid on that bed that first night, and I thought, man, you know, I have my own place. Of course, I didn't have any toilet paper eventually, and I didn't have any shampoo because nobody was supplying. That was the worst, having to buy my own. Oh, I got to buy my toilet paper. But I was okay, and I took the bus. I got a job at Sheridan Lutheran Church. I believe I was called to work there. I didn't think I would ever work at a church, and took the bus, and eventually got a car, and this sounds silly to some people, but I remember waking up in the middle of the night one night and hearing the neighbors and hearing their children up in the middle of the night and missing my kids, and being able to walk out my door and get in a car that belonged to me and just go drive, right? And I hadn't been able to do that for a very long time. I didn't talk to 2 of my kids for almost 2 years, and that was really. I got to a place where I didn't know if I'd ever see my kids again, and now I have all 3 of my children in my care and custody in my home, and they've been there. It'll be a year in June. You know, yay. And I always think back to, I don't know, I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to come talk to people about this program and what it does, because I don't think people understand, because I didn't understand. I didn't understand when I was, before I got really sick, and I did not understand that it wasn't just a place that offered a bed for a woman who was on the street for some reason. And my experience there was that there were women from all walks of homelessness, you know. There are women there that suffer from alcoholism and drug addiction. There are women coming out of penal institutions and trying to start a new life. Women that suffer from mental issues, depression, you know, and who are somehow been displaced from their family and society and need to find a way back. And Fresh Start offers that. I love to go out and talk to people about it. My hope for Fresh Start, and I always say this, is that we can someday build another home. I know that my wait was not terribly long, but in the 5 weeks that I was on the street, when I got out of treatment, I was drinking and using drugs, and I probably wouldn't have made it back. I don't think if it had been much longer. And my hope is that we can get to a place where there's a bed for anybody that's coming out of a place or needs some place to be. Because once they're back in the mix, it's really hard to come back in. And I don't know, maybe that's all I have. Is that it? Yes, that's it.
again, thank you to Laura and the strength and the bravery that she just showed us in sharing all of that, because as you can tell, that was an extremely personal, that's her life that she just shared with us. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I've heard, I know Laura, obviously, since I'm working Fresh Start, and I've heard her speak several times, and every time it still gets to me, because that is what we hope all of our residents, all of the women at Fresh Start, that is what we hope they get to, is that they get to the place where they don't just have the clothes on their back in desperation. That was the first time you'd said that phrase. So my hope is always that people don't just have the clothes on the back in desperation, that they've gotten to this place where they have not just everything they need, but that they have hope and that they know that they are valued and that they can do better and that they can have what they want and get what they want because they're worth it and they're strong enough to do it. And that is what Laura is showing us, and that's what all of our residents are showing us today. So thank you for being that inspiration, Laura. So, thank you.